We're no stranger to false advertising. Content creators, actors, musicians, heck, even billboards, hyping up, claiming, promising impossible things. I tend to steer clear of companies that I don't trust, and I refuse to work with companies that don't give me the freedom to cover their product how I want. This is something that I always lead with when considering sponsored content. If lying is a requirement, then how good can their product really be? Right? With this in mind, today I want to talk to all of you about 6 different companies that offered me financial incentive to lie to all of you, to convince you to play their game without your knowledge. Before we do though, quick shout out to all of our patrons over on Patreon. You guys are absolutely incredible, and your support is a growing part of why I get to turn down sponsorships like these, so thank you. Now, let's start this off with Warlords Awakening, published by Play With Interactive Incorporated. Before Warlords Awakening released, there were 2 different instances of the game available to players, Elite Lord of Alliance and In Spirit Online. These were both free-to-play MMOs. There was no premium price tag connected to it that was required to play. Both versions of the game ultimately shut down. They were poorly received, and players just weren't all that interested. Fast forward a couple years, the game was announced to be returning, this time as Warlords Awakening. This was the same game that had shut down twice before, but the difference? Now it was a premium title. It required you to purchase it to play it. After seeing the price tag and the founders packs being sold for a game with no alterations to warrant a change in business model, well, I was taken aback, and after playing for a few hours, I had come to the conclusion that this was just as bad as the incarnations that came before it, and that it was in no way worth the money that we'd invested into it. Thus, I gave my opinion of the game in a video titled Warlords Awakening is a disgusting, rebranded cash grab of an MMORPG that, naturally, as I'm sure some of you guys would expect, upset some of the players that were enjoying it. Understandably, yet it was what went on behind closed doors that really furthered my belief that this was indeed a cash grab and a scam. After doing this video, the team behind the game reached out to me in an email asking me if I would be interested in doing a dedicated video on Warlords Awakening, paid, of course. This shocked me, as I had just told our viewers that I thought the game was garbage, and I attempted to steer our viewers clear of it. But if they were going to pay me to dive deeper into the game and maybe, I don't know, experience a little more, then I would be willing. I gave them my price. They were happy with the price, and just before agreeing to the terms, they sent me an email stating, "Sorry, we didn't see this video before we first reached out to you," linking to the dedicated video that I did on the game. They noted that I had, quote unquote here, trashed the game several days ago, so to post a positive video now would seem unauthentic. They assumed here that the video that I would post would be positive, mind you. Now, with this in mind, the only way we could move forward with this sponsorship would be if I removed that video. So they offered me a large sum of money. They led me to believe that they were fine with the negative video that I had done on their game. And at the very last second, once we were in agreement, they told me that to continue to receive all of this money, all I needed to do was retract my statement and my video on the topic, which evidently did not happen and never will. Then, ooh, man, where do I even get started with this company? I guess let's go ahead and begin with ArcheAge. I have covered ArcheAge and ArcheAge Unchained both positively and negatively in the past. I have agreed that it is a good game at its core, but I've disagreed with various updates and how Gamigo have handled it, and Gamigo were fine with that. Now, ArcheAge is a horrendously pay-to-win free MMO, but it's free nonetheless, so we can't really complain, right? ArcheAge Unchained was Gamigo's answer to a common issue that players had with the game. By offering it as a premium title, they would remove pay-to-win elements entirely. And this actually went over quite well. Players were happy, ecstatic even. But when they announced that the game was going to become a premium title, they also confirmed that once you buy the game, it would not only be entirely free for life, but every update would be free as well. And after a period of time, Gamigo reached out to me. "Hey Styx, we want you to do a dedicated video on ArcheAge Unchained, but we have an immediate deadline. It needs to happen by this date, not a single day later." This was a little bit unusual, as the date was maybe a week or so from the day that I received the email. They elaborated on what I needed to do, a positive ArcheAge Unchained video. I happened to be on vacation that week, and it wasn't until I returned that I realized why they wanted to pay me to do a positive video on Unchained. The day I returned, they announced their very first large-scale expansion, Garden of the Gods. In that announcement, Gamigo retracted their promise of free content, charging players $15.99 for the Silver DLC pack, $29.99 for the Gold DLC pack, and $59.99 for the Arceum DLC pack. Thus, to access any of the content, you were required to pay for it. They wanted to pay me to do a positive video before they launched Garden of the Gods without my knowledge that it was launching, which would have looked like I was in support of their transition, their retraction, their lie. An absolutely disgusting, abhorrent thing to do. But that isn't the only instance. On the contrary, the year before that, they had contacted me to do videos on Trove and ArcheAge. Since I hadn't covered either that year, I was more than happy jumping in and doing a returning to Trove and returning to ArcheAge video. So they send me a draft of the contract that I needed to sign. I see a listing for Trove, I see a listing for ArcheAge, I see a listing for a pre-roll that I agreed to do for ArcheAge. I'm overall happy with how it looks, so I tell them that it's acceptable and they should send me over the official contract to sign, which they do. And typically I don't reread contracts once I've confirmed the draft is acceptable, and I've learned to since this instance, but this time in specific I did, because I wanted to reaffirm something. And I saw a listing for 2 instances of Trove, one for ArcheAge and one for Aura Kingdom, meaning that if I signed this without verifying, not only would I have been contractually obligated to do a video on Aura Kingdom, which we never agreed on, but I would have also had to have done an additional video on Trove against my will, paying me to bring to the attention of my viewers games that I did not agree to. See, this gets worse, right? My final dealing with them, and this is where I'd actually ended my working relationship with them, was in the form of the ArcheAge private server. I'd covered private servers in the past, and companies had always politely asked me to remove my videos, which I have always acquiesced to. Gamigo, however, instead, they issued a copyright takedown, giving me a strike on my channel. I emailed them asking them to remove the strike, stating that I would gladly remove the video on ArcheAge, absolutely no problem. Their response: "You've talked badly about us in the past. Maybe next time, try not to." And at that point, I sat there in disbelief, and I came to the resolution that I would never, ever work with or promote another Gamigo title ever again. They are by far the worst company that I have ever worked with, and are arguably the worst publisher in the entire MMO genre. Now, then this next one isn't, it's not necessarily pertaining to an MMO, but the company does publish MMOs. So basically on January 20th, I received an email from 101 XP, the people behind games like Dragon Blood, like Era of Legends, and Jade Dynasty Mobile. They were curious if I did sponsored integrations, as in a 60 to 90 second ad at the beginning of a video, which all of us content creators do. I noted that I did, and I asked what specifically they wanted me to discuss, and this is where it gets interesting. They noticed that I had top 10 videos ranking, pulling in hundreds of thousands of views. So their proposition, they wanted me to do a 2-minute game review and mask this inclusion as an actual entry in the top 10 video. The most laughable part of all of this is that the game in question was Craft of Survivals, a mobile game that isn't even an MMO. So they offered me thousands of dollars to pretend this game was a game that I genuinely recommend in a video dedicated to 10 of the best MMOs. They didn't want to pay me for a pre-roll like I've done many times in the past. This is the one single instance where this has happened, and when I read it, I almost couldn't believe it. It's unreal. They also didn't want me to sign any contracts, just a verbal, written agreement. That was pretty sus. Now, earlier, I noted that Playwith approached me with a sponsored opportunity for Warlords Awakening. They led me to believe that they were interested in having me cover their game. It didn't even need to be positive. And then just before agreeing, sprung the "oh, we didn't know you did a negative video" crap on me in an attempt to get me to remove the video. NeoWiz actually did something similar. Now, let me preface this by stating that this is not specifically pertaining to Bandai Namco and their console version of Bless Unleashed, since that is handled by a separate division than the PC version is. This is completely disconnected. Rather, this is directly concerning NeoWiz. Allow me to provide a little bit of background though. Bless Online launched as a premium title. It had a box price and founders packs that cost hundreds of dollars. We all bought it and it turned out that it was trash. And you know what, that was fine. Buying a game doesn't guarantee that the game is going to be good. Fast forward several months, I did a video discussing how the population was so low that it'll probably transition over to a free-to-play business model soon, which they did. And that not only screwed over every player that purchased the game, but they also sold entirely new founders packs. They made an absolute killing off of this, and I did dedicated videos at every point covering everything they did to hurt and to take advantage of their community. Shortly after, they announced that they were shutting Bless Online down after taking tens, hundreds of millions of dollars from players. The next year came an announcement of a new Bless title, Bless Unleashed. I did a video covering this, going on to confirm that it was essentially Bless Online with Round 8 Studios working on it, a subsidiary of NeoWiz, and I claimed that Unleashed would also be hot garbage. It launched onto console and honestly didn't turn out to be the garbage that I had anticipated, and I was glad to see that. I'm more than happy admitting when I'm wrong. It was still a poorly designed game, but it wasn't trash. NeoWiz saw the success that it had and decided that they were going to launch Bless Unleashed onto PC as well, to make even more money off of gullible players. Now, prior to launching Bless Unleashed, I was reached out to by NeoWiz. They propositioned me with quite a large amount of money to do a dedicated video on their game. This was perhaps one of the largest sums that I have ever been offered for a sponsored video. But for me to accept this, I would be required to remove the negative video I did on Bless Unleashed in the past, not Bless Online. That game was completely irrelevant to them at this juncture. Bless Unleashed specifically. Then I would get one of the largest paydays of my entire career on YouTube. Naturally, I turned them down. There was no way that I would either A, do a sponsored video on Bless Unleashed, I cannot think of anyone that would willingly accept that deal, and B, accept payment to retract a negative, factually correct video I did on their game. Next up is Legion: The Eternal War from Nexus Division, which admittedly hasn't seen an update on their social media for almost a year now. Back when they first released their trailer, I saw a few things that set off some alarms. I left a comment on their trailer, which led the team to reach out to me directly through email. After a few exchanges, and ahead of my dedicated video on the game, they reached out to me once more. They opened crowdfunding for their game, and they went on to state that they needed more working capital. In their exact words, "If your video increases our sales from a positive video review, we will give you 20% of all earnings from the point that you release your video about us." That was the most blunt email that I'd ever received. Do a positive video, refer your viewers to us, and make 20% of everything we make from the point your video releases forever. They did note further down that they aren't offering me money to say positive things, just, you know, financially incentivizing us to positively impact their sales, which is more or less the same thing. After responding to their email, telling them that I found it to be highly suspect, they responded by telling me that they don't understand how influencer marketing works. They just assume that companies throw money at people for positive reviews. And I get it, you might be able to in some instances, or a lot of instances. After doing a video discussing how I was reached out to, they sent me a follow-up email telling me that they were sad that I went ahead and said the things that I said about them, how hurtful it was to them and to their team, and that the only reason they offered me a 20% cut of all future earnings was because it fit their budget. But if you were to offer me 20% of all of your earnings and you were making $20,000 from crowdfunding, that would equate to $4,000 every month. What about other influencers that you reached out to? Would they get a cut as well for positively influencing your funding? Furthermore, it's worth noting that they never mentioned disclosing this partnership to the public, meaning that you wouldn't even know that I was making thousands of dollars from this. How shady is that? In closing, their last email asked me to remove my video and give the game a try. A game that was using Unreal Engine Store assets, a game with no actual, well, game. And at that point, I ceased all contact with them. And finally, as a little added bonus here, as they didn't ask me to lie, only attempted to bribe me into removing a video, we have MiHoYo, or Hoyoverse as they're now known. Back during the Genshin Impact closed beta, MiHoYo had reached out to me to cover it, not sponsored, completely unpaid, not incentivized in the least. Just that they were providing Mrs. and I accounts to participate in their closed beta test. After sending an email out concerning the beta test, an email that was made public all over social media, I decided that I was going to cover it in a dedicated video. I hadn't noticed that the email asked not to share the contents, and they pulled my beta access as a direct result of this, which I totally understand and I completely agree with. That was my bad. However, what they did next is what was shocking to me. My contact at MiHoYo sent me a DM via Discord. He told me that he had to pull my beta access, but also that I had to remove the video and issue a retraction. It was not okay for me to have the video up or for me to discuss the beta test. But since it was never stated in the terms of service, and no contract was signed explicitly stating that we were legally unable to share the email or to discuss the contents, I opted to leave it up. Yes, posting the video was a mistake on my part, I take full responsibility for that, but there was no reason to remove it. Fast forward a few days, MiHoYo reached out to me again. They told me that they had a proposition for me. If I were to remove the video, they would have confirmed Genshin Impact related sponsored opportunities for me in the future, worth thousands of dollars per opportunity, offering me quite a bit of money to remove what I had discussed, what I had revealed. Naturally, I said no, and admittedly, I have worked with MiHoYo several times since on games like Honkai Impact 3rd, with the upcoming Honkai Star Rail, and hopefully with Zenless Zone Zero as well. This has been a small look at a few different companies that I've worked with, a peek behind the curtains as it were. Yes, I'm calling out a few of them. Yes, this also means no longer working with some of the companies in the future, but at the same time, would you trust me if I did? I hold myself to a certain moral standard, along with the companies that I work with, and they should do the same.